becoming mayor, where did it start? Because you've done a bunch of different things, or you still do different things.
I watched a couple previous councils. I was not someone who went to council on a regular basis. I didn't really quite know all the nitty gritty of what councils do for cities. But I just seen some meetings and thought, they didn't seem to really know exactly what they were doing procedurally. And I felt like legally, but in the sense of not legal with attorneys, but legal with the Constitution. And so I thought, well, I kept complaining about it, and I had a lot to say about it. And finally, my husband said to me, okay, enough talking. Either do something or shut up.
Right.
So I decided, okay, fine, I'll do something. So I ran, and I didn't know anyone at the time that was on council. I didn't have a huge group of friends up here. We were fairly new to the community. Although my husband had lived up here previously and graduated high school, I didn't have a circle of anyone. So my husband was like, well, shut up or do something. Right. So I did something. And I was really surprised when I got elected because like I said, I didn't really know anyone or anything, but I did. I got elected. And then I was like, well, crap, now what? Because I don't know how any of this works. So I had a learning curve for a while, and I was pretty quiet on council for about a year at least, and just kind of sat back and observed and learned a lot. And then there are programs with there's Pikes Peak Regional Area Government, and there's Colorado Municipal League, and they have courses and classes and things that you can attend and learn more about how the government works, what your responsibility is as a community leader, even procedures on council, Robert's Rules of Orders, all that stuff. So I participated in a lot of that to make sure I knew what I was doing, because I have learned, I think it's the rule of life, is he who knows the rules wins. So knowing those rules while sitting up there is really important. But I also think that's part of how I became mayor, was because procedurally I do try to abide by the rules as often as possible. Right. So, not as often as possible. I do abide by the rules, but I also know them and know the procedure. And so, I hope that the citizens saw that, and, that my fellow council members understand that and respect that. And I try to be as fair as possible. And I think when you know the rules, it helps you be fair. Right. So
that's really it. I never knew that they had courses or classes on that. And we briefly talked about it when I got in here, but I'd never paid attention or participated. And that's what this is kind of about, is I feel, and you even touched on it too, about, I think people, they look at the federal level and they look at this very high level, and then I don't blame people for thinking that there's this, it's so far distant, I would not be able to change anything.
Right.
And after going to just a few city council meetings, and it's not that this is easy. It's not. It wasn't that. But when people are bringing up, we need a traffic light here because it's dangerous for this. But it was something as simple as that to kind of recently what we're talking about now is the short-term rentals, and some people don't want them and some people do, but I tried to leave it as simple as that. People want things.
Sure.
And some people don't.
Sure. And
you guys decide what's best. And so anyway, I want to go back to the whole taking classes on how to do that, because I don't think people know. And you said, like, I don't know. You admittingly said, I don't know what I'm doing. Right. So I need to find out. But, and I was in that boat with, I complain.
Yeah.
And you brought up several things like the Constitution and not knowing, but what was it about the Constitution? Like, you mean?
Well, our rights, taking our rights away. And I mean, I have a law degree from DU, so I'm not ignorant to how things work, but you can't know everything. And I'd never exposed myself to city councils before, and didn't really pay attention to how they impact, your livelihood, because I was like everyone else paying attention to what's in the media and the news, and it's all federal and really the big players that you vote for. And, it's kind of become an entertaining force in the world. It's more like Hollywood than actual politics anymore. But your city councils are the grassroots, and people don't realize how much they do impact. They're the ones who impact zoning and your lot sizes, and being able to do the short-term rentals, long-term rentals, all kinds of things that impact where you actually live in your home, how you're getting your streets paved, your water clean. And we don't realize what a big what do I want to say, like mechanism councils actually are until you start showing up and participating. And you don't have to have any kind of background to run for council either. There's no requirements, kind of like being the president, right? You have a couple easy ones, like you have to be 45 and a citizen, but you really don't need to know much. and we've seen that. So, and it's the same with councils. So you get regular folks who get on there, and oftentimes it's people who run because they understand that council does control a certain system that you live by. And they usually, not all, but some people will run because they want to manipulate that system. Like they are builders or developers. And I'm not trying to give them a bad name, because I myself am a developer and I'm a real estate investor. But I didn't have any self-interest in running, but I know other council members previously who have. And so we forget that there's a lot of control in those positions, and they really can impact our freedom.
Well, and what you said right there, you can abuse anything. So even if you're a builder or a developer, a politician, whatever, a mechanic, you can abuse the position that you're in. Sure. And you can have good intentions with the position that you're in. So I think that's what I'm trying to expose, because I feel like some people think it's this hidden secret, but it is as simple as that. You can have good intentions or bad ones, and you can run and get elected, and abuse where you're at. With the law and the Constitution, so for me, I'll just give you I read it, and I hate to say that, because I don't think people do.
I don't think they do. No. And I think people have different interpretations of it too sometimes, depending on the backgrounds that they come from and the way that they're taught it sometimes. I have that current experience right now with a council member who I sit with. They think they're a sovereign citizen, and that's a really unique position because they don't think that our government is legitimate. And they believe in the Constitution, but only up until prior to the 14th Amendment, something like that. Yeah. And it's like, no, the whole Constitution, you got to take the whole thing, and you can't alter it to have it fit your desires and circumstances.
Well, and so being a lawyer, you're killing like 3 or 4 birds with one stone, because you do real estate and you do and you're a lawyer, and you're in a position of power. Constitutionally, I hear the comment a lot. Your rights can't impact my rights, and for a while I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, they do every day, because if I have the right to buy a house, for example, this person over here has a right to buy the house too, and you've just impeded my pursuit of happiness. So now I'm not happy, and is that too simple of a way to put it, or is that not correct in any form?
You mean if you're competing?
Sure. Yeah.
No, because you both have the right, and you both have the equal right. One of you might have more money though. Sure. But that's not a violation of anyone's rights. The only way you can infringe upon my rights is if you're doing something illegal. And that's why there's tort and criminal law. But our rights are inalienable and equal. So your right to own your home and my right to own my home, and us as neighbors, our rights are absolutely equal. You don't have a right to a view that suddenly somehow I have a right to, or I don't have a right to. There's no separating that. So, and zoning is part of taking care of some of those things and balancing some of those things. Zoning came into play during the Industrial Revolution because people were, they had houses next to industrial complexes and people were dropping dead. So some bureaucrat somewhere came up with the idea, and it's not necessarily a bad one, I can give them that credit, that you shouldn't live next to, a nuclear power plant or, a toxic dump or a waste facility with residential housing. So that was really the crux of zoning. But it wasn't to tell one neighbor over the other that somehow that neighbor has more rights. Right. We all have equal rights in our neighborhoods.
And I feel that that council member was the same one that spoke to me at the last city council meeting, because I quoted Benjamin Franklin, and then he goes, but one of the things that he said was, I need to think of everybody. And I don't think that's wrong, but the way I heard it was, I need to make everybody happy.
You can't.
And that's where I was kind of going with that, is I don't know how that's, I think there's a misconception between pursuit of happiness, my rights, my unalienable rights, and you can't make me unhappy.
Well, the way I look at it is, my job is not to make anyone happy. There's 100% of people out of 100%, 50% are going to be pissed at me, 100% never going to be happy. Maybe 100% could be angry with me, but it's always going to be half and half. I can't make all the people happy all the time, but my job isn't about making anyone happy. My job is not about how you feel. The way I see my position, and maybe other council members see it this way, maybe they don't. My job is to protect your freedom. That's it. That's why I ran. That's why I'm sitting up there, because I don't want the government to take any more of our freedom. And people may not think about it with city councils that often, but they can take your freedom. And this issue with the short-term rentals is, it's a taking of your property rights, because you can no longer use your home as you see fit. And it is an economical taking, and it's freedom and economics, the whole kit and caboodle. And people, one of the arguments was, well, okay, we don't have short-term rentals in the code yet. It's not defined. But the way that zoning works, now there's two different legal stances on it. Some legal people think that if a particular thing is not zoned and it's not in your zoning chart, then it's not allowed. The other way to look at it is legally is it's permissible because it's like use. You're not doing something. We're not, it's not a carnival. It's not a rock concert. It's not a grocery store or a mechanic shop. It is like use with short-term rentals. It is people using the home as a home. And that's allowed in single-family residential zones. So they're not doing something phenomenally absurd. Not only that, the city had already licensed these people, and they are taxing these people. So it is as if it's permitted. And that's from previous councils. What should have happened is, years ago, when they started to license and tax, that's when the councils should have said, oh, hold on, it's not in our code. We need to get it in there as permissible use, And so, but the way I look at it is, I understand that people want to keep neighborhoods. And I empathize with that. But we're in a very peculiar time right now, with people being very transient with their jobs. People now can work from home, so they can choose to live places they may never have chosen to live before. A lot of people think that Woodland Park is way out, way out in the mountains, and we're really only 20 minutes from the springs. So we're really not like a long drive into town. We're kind of like a bedroom community that way. So some people who didn't want to live here before because of the commute, maybe now they don't even have to commute. They can work from home. But I don't see a lot of people, being in the industry, a lot of people move a lot now. And they change jobs a lot now, too. They're not staying in their neighborhoods and having their children grow up there and stay in the same schools. Plus, we live in a heavily concentrated military town where people really are coming and going often. And I can't find the data yet enough that supports in this community to say that STRs are devastating us or significantly harming us enough that the government should step in and take freedom away. I can't find that yet. So I've been trying to work with council members to get them to understand that we don't have to act brashly or irrationally. We can say, hey, we'd like to collect more data. We need more information to make a better decision. And in the meantime, though, we can understand the impact that it would cause to the current people that have STRs. And I also think people think of STR owners as people who live somewhere else, but they have purchased a home and they're solely using that home as a short-term rental for business. But that's not really the case in this community either. We have a lot of people who live here in the community that are either Airbnb-ing their basements or they have purchased properties and they are using them as short-term rentals, but these people have children in school here, they work here, they live here. They're impacted by bad business too, and they don't want their name associated with bad business either. So they're very conscientious of taking care of their short-term rentals and the kind of clientele they have.
Going back to like the data and I play devil's advocate a little bit.
Sure.
So when it comes to the decision, do you need data to say, let's take this away from them?
No.
Because I feel like that's like kind of like guns, for example. 100% of people who kill people are people, and so the blanket thrown over is just, we'll just get rid of it. That does it. And I'm not trying to go off on guns. I'm just using it as an example of, so whether you had data or not, would it be right to still take that right away?
Well, I think that's what's happening in cities is they don't have the data and they're making assumptions. And I feel like a lot of the assumption is workforce housing. Oh, these short-term rentals are making it impossible for workers to afford housing. I don't know many people. Actually, I'll just say I don't know anyone that works at Safeway that owns an $800,000 home.
I was gonna say, I looked at how many houses are for sale, and there's a lot. So if there was I feel like and I'm new in this.
Yeah.
So I feel like if there was an influx of people just trying to overtake the town, big corporations with STR dreams, they would have been swallowed, especially now. Yeah. I mean, because in a recession, those who have it buy and they just overtake. So I didn't mean to interrupt.
It's fine.
There's so many homes for sale, and you're like, unless you can afford it, you're not buying a place.
No, and you're especially not going to just do it on a whim and hope that your Airbnb is successful either. You're taking a huge economic risk because what you offer may not be what the market demands. And the market, I think is actually, I think that there's some saturation there. So some people are going to make it and some people aren't. But what has happened is cities, I don't know what their logical argument is. I don't feel like there really has been one. I think they have feelings about why they're doing it, but I'm not the kind of person, oddly enough, being a woman, that feels like feelings are enough to take someone's property from them and their economic freedom and their entrepreneurship. That's what this country was founded on. And you may not like the Airbnbs, but it's also not Airbnb and VRBO or the corporations that are doing this. These are American citizens who have the entrepreneurial spirit, who are willing to take the risk and hopefully get the return. And why do we want to crush that? If I can't find statistics that are telling me that they are ruining our neighborhoods in some health, welfare, safety form, then it's not enough for me to take it from you. And people will say, well, welfare, and it's, the happiness of my neighborhood. But it's none of your business what people do in their homes.
The general
either.
welfare, that's what you mean?
Yeah.
They throw that out there?
Yeah, they'll try to throw that out there, but that's not really what that means. And people come and go from their homes. People are going to have gatherings. People are going to have parties. And all I'm hearing is, well, noise, parking, maybe, we live in the mountains, so sometimes we have fire restrictions or feeding wildlife. Those are code enforcement issues that we already have regulations for, that can already be enforced. So, so you're telling me that feeding deer and having 4 cars in your parking driveway is enough for the government to step in and say, you're not allowed to have this home anymore, to operate it the way you see fit? That's insane to me.
I went to city council in Cascade about the same issue, the short-term rentals.
Yeah.
And I think, so that was my first council meeting ever. And I say that to encourage others to go to city council meetings.
Sure.
Because it blew my mind. Someone walked up and complained about trash, and then they complained about a party. And I mean, my first thought is I don't throw parties at my house, wild, crazy things.
Right.
But it's not illegal to have a party, first off. And second, they were talking about trash being thrown in the yards. And there was still a code ordinance with that, which gave them a year to get rid of it if it was a health issue. Mm-hmm. So I thought, my first thought was, well, who's supposed to enforce it? And this is me knowing nothing. And I'm not saying that I discovered something great. It's just, they're very simple concepts. Well, how come somebody's not enforcing it, but we're just going to get rid of it?
Right.
And there was a guy on that council who said, and I felt it was a really wise comment that he made, but he said, in my experience, if 2 people disagree, the best way to handle it is to sit down and talk about it. And all of the things that I learned, the most profound to me were people sitting there, arms crossed, shaking their heads no. And I have a 5-year-old that does that. And that blew my mind the most, was people are the problem.
Yes.
And it's not, I don't feel, even federally, like it doesn't have that much to do with some federal regulation or federal process. Now, I'm not saying they're not issues either, but at the lowest level, at a town level, people with their arms crossed, shaking their heads no, that they won't sit down and talk about it.
Right.
Blew my mind.
Right.
The most.
Right. And it's I think it's because people have forgotten what the country was founded on and how hard we work to get where we are. And we've gotten so comfortable and so used to the luxuries that we have that you forget, people die over it. Still to this day, we have soldiers fighting and dying so that we can have these stupid arguments, And so how ignorant of you to give up our rights or to take freedom when someone is literally dying over it. And I think that because we live in such a cushioned world now, and we're busy, and I understand that, and people are busy working, and they're busy raising kids, and they're busy just trying to get by, that you don't have time to pay attention to those things. But for those of us in a position that do, how dare us? Why are we trying to take people's freedom? And your house your property is one of the most important things, because you've worked tooth and nail to own that and to have the ability and the luxury to live there. And, kind of the advent of this system, there's always been vacation rentals, and, you could always rent your basement or rent a room in your house. These STR platforms have provided a mechanism to make it more prominent now, but also it has allowed people to generate more wealth. And as someone who loves and respects freedom, I also love and respect the economy that comes with it and the wealth that comes with it, because you're working really hard to own the home, but now you're working really hard to also generate that income, and you may need that income. I mean, someone may be using that to rent out their basement or Airbnb their basement because they don't have a retirement, or they don't have a pension, or they don't have military benefits. They don't have, and there are a lot of people nowadays that they don't have pensions when they retire. They don't have any sense of financial security. So this gives them an opportunity for financial security. And I think it's really selfish of other people to want to take that from them, because they're not hurting anyone. If the guests they have are violating a code ordinance, that can be resolved. But is it really worth taking their freedom of economics and property from them over a loud party that happens?
I was gonna mention that too. After reading the Constitution, I decided to go into the Federalist Papers, and these people disagreed with each other.
Yes.
And there were reasons for it, and they stated their reasons. But I want to go to the factions argument in the Federalist Papers. You can have a very loud minority.
Yes.
And they might be the only ones speaking, but you still can't just cater to it and just, so I feel like there's not enough careful thought put into, well, I'm upset. And I'm going to, this might not be the best comment, but I did notice that most of the ones that were upset about it, their kids are probably my age.
Right.
So, I mean, like, me trying to better my family in a economy the way it is, like what you just said, none of that, I think, constitutes just throwing a blanket over it and getting rid of it.
Right.
But does that make sense? Is there a, since your time as mayor, have you noticed a difference in, say, maybe not ages is the wrong word, but a group of people that prefer something over the other?
There's always the 5 angry few, always, who don't want anything. They don't want any change. They don't want anything new to come to town. They don't want any progress to happen. But then they'll also complain that there aren't any restaurants, or there aren't enough, or there's, and people forget, progress happens and growth happens. Populations grow. Towns explode, communities explode with growth. It's just the natural cycle of life. You can't keep everybody away. And the more strict that you regulate growth, the higher your own taxes will become. So that's something people don't think about either. The less growth you want in your community, taxes will be increased over time because the values of your property increase. There can be sales tax on food. There can be mill levy raises. All kinds of dynamics happen that can actually force you out of where you live, because now you can't support yourself living there anymore because the prices become so high. And growth helps spread that burden of taxation. And tourism helps spread the burden of taxation, because tourists pick up sales tax and help with all kinds of, things that you don't really think about because you're not aware of when you're not participating in it so much. So, you look at what happened like with Aspen, for example. I can promise you that there are probably no native Aspen people. Like, what would you call them? Aspenites? I don't know.
Aspians.
Yeah, Aspians. But because they regulated growth so heavily, but so many wealthy came in and picked up homes, and the assessors were reevaluating the taxation of the property, and it was just rising, but no growth was being allowed, and it was just staying stagnant. And so the people who are from there, grew up there, were raised there, they couldn't afford to stay in their homes anymore. They had to sell and leave and go where they could afford it. Had Aspen allowed growth, it could have balanced it out. I don't know that it would have, because I mean, what's the average cost of a home up there? $47 million, you know? I know the average rent right now is like $22,000 a month.
Oh, I didn't
So,
know that.
yeah. So, you know, I don't know that growth would have necessarily solved it, but it could have alleviated it up until what point, I don't know. And I know Aspen's also like us. They can't grow exponentially. They're not like, you know, like Colorado Springs can annex land and Denver could annex, and you can go out to the prairie and keep going east and stuff. We're surrounded by forests, so we're stuck. We can't grow a whole lot. And that's also something we have to really weigh and consider too, is if we can't grow anymore, we can right now, but once we get to a point where we can't grow anymore, what do we do to help alleviate taxation on our citizens? Because that won't stop growing. And the tax that won't stop growing is typically, it's a county tax done by the assessor because it's valuation of your homes. And like once, say, Woodland Park gets all grown out and you can't build anymore and we're just stuck with what we have, the value of our homes will still increase. So that tax will still go up. So how do you alleviate that? So if you're a homeowner, say, and you've lived here for 20 years, or you're a senior, and all of a sudden your taxes have risen, and you may be really sweating about how you're going to pay for that. Well, maybe you can short-term rent your basement, or long-term, but there's an economic way that would allow you to keep your home. And why should I, as a government official, say, oh, no, you're out of here? Not only did some other government official raise your tax, but now I'm going to kick you out because you can't pay your tax. It's so much for freedom and property and
Right.
the Constitution.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of a time when, I mean, I'm sure that there are good reasons for regulations and more laws, but I don't know if it ever helped much. And I'm trying to find one of those.
Right. I mean,
But,
there's some reasonable things, but.
And I think that reasonable is I don't like common sense or reasonable or logical. Those might have to be defined to some people, because I don't, and I mean that sincerely almost, because I did look up a little bit of like voting data at a election result back in April, but I wasn't really looking for what the measure was or the ballot was. I was looking for how many voted, and not that many.
No.
And so I parallel that with what we're talking about now. Is if you cared, it seems like you would participate. And I'm throwing myself in that boat because I didn't for so long. So I'm hopefully this would help people care, but
Sure.
Not many at all. I think there was 8,000 people in Woodland Park last I looked at, somewhere a little over that, but then only 2,500 ballots were counted, and that's at the lowest level. That's the reason I didn't take state data or United States data.
Well,
or
even
whatever.
looking at our county levels, for the most recent, like the national elections, we have about 40,000 some residents in the county. And I think there was maybe 5,000 that turned out for the recent elections. It's so low. And then people wonder what's wrong, and it's because I know. I always tell people, you have to vote. You have to vote. I have a friend who's 30 some years old, never participated in elections, and finally he agreed to register to vote just this past year. And I was like, it may not feel like it makes a difference, but it's certainly not if you don't participate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And people I think it's really dropped off and diminished. And I don't know why, but it has.
Well, and I think that goes back to what we first talked about, was they think federally. I did do one on the definition of government from the old 1828 dictionary, but it was government of yourself. Yes. And that's what I mean sometimes by the lowest level. Sure. Control your temper and your passions, which is what the definition was, and it doesn't even get to a federal level until I think the fourth definition in it, but even at the town level, and that's why I just go to a city council meeting and go to a school board meeting.
Oh my gosh.
And I think, and even then, if you don't know and you want to do something about it, and you're the prime example of that, go take some classes on, because I'm still blown away by that there are classes on how to be mayor or whatever. Right?
And speaking of the classes, there's actually a really, really helpful company called Jurassic Parliament, and they're online, and anyone can register for their courses. And they teach you Robert's Rules of Order, parliamentary procedures, and you can learn. You don't have to be in the government to participate in those courses. CML and Pikes Peak Area of Government, Council of Government, you need to be an elected official to participate, but you can still go to their websites and look up their information and read about a lot of different topics and, what they're doing and how they do things. But Jurassic Parliament's brilliant because they also, I've given all of my council members the books that they print so that they would understand Robert's Rule of Order simply and council procedures simply, like how to make a motion. Who knows how to make a motion? How do you know that? Like no one knows.
Yeah.
So, and you either just learn trial by error or, you can study it with Jurassic Parliament, and then the other courses that are offered, they teach you all kinds of stuff like that, and ethics and legal responsibilities that we have as councils. So there's a lot to learn, and every year they have like an annual meeting, CML does, that you can participate in, and you go to different classes and you get to meet all the different council members and mayors, and they just held a mayor's meeting down in Denver that I attended, and I sat with, almost all the mayors from all the communities in Colorado, including Mayor Hancock. And what's really interesting is we're all, the one thing about council is we're supposed to be nonpartisan. I say we're supposed to be because, we all have our parties, and those carry into principles as well, personally. But it gives us an opportunity. Like I could hear Mayor Hancock talk and have a discussion, and he's a Democrat, and I'm more libertarian than anything, but we can find common ground too, and I can learn from them. And I think that's been the other disconnect, and a disconnect you see at the federal level definitely is we're all still human, and we all have experiences that we can share and learn from. We don't have to be divided sides all the time. And what's odd is I sit on a council that I think all of them have declared themselves conservative, and yet here we are fighting over short-term rental and property rights. And so I find that really, really frustrating and bizarre. Yeah.
Because when he spoke to me and considered himself a student of the Constitution, and like I said, all I did was read it. And it's not as if I had some sort of knowledge that he doesn't, but it does blow my mind. We need to take it away. And then, we're not taking it away. See, what we're doing is, and then it just sounded.
Well, it's manipulative.
Right.
Yeah.
And I want to, how do you be nonpartisan? And I ask that in this way. I don't think it's possible to not have a belief or an opinion. And there was a guy running for governor in Idaho. Ammon Bundy was running for governor in Idaho.
Yeah.
But he actually said, and I caught myself when I was voting, no one is saying what they're going to do. And I think that's the typical frustration that some people have. And if they don't pay attention, they might not have that
or
frustration.
Or they say they'll do it and then they don't.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that saying, I'm going to get rid of this, I am going to get rid of that. It was specific, and I don't think people would agree with it, but at least to me, he was at least saying so that's a clear partisan thought. That is a clear, I am going to do this, a belief. So I do wonder, even at the level of a city, how is it possible to do that, simply put? I think it's difficult because
because I also think that we have let our politics become part of our principles, where, and I think it's skewed. Politics anymore has become, we talk about it at the dinner table now, we talk about it at holidays now, we talk about it with strangers now. I mean, I was sitting at a bar in Denver when I was down in Denver for the Mayor's Forum, and two perfectly nice strangers asked me, what would I do right now if Trump walked in? And, 10 years ago, no one would ask me anything about a candidate or the current president or what my political stance was in order to determine whether they were going to sit next to me or have a conversation with me in general. Now we use it as our guidepost and as to who we're going to be friends with or associate with. And so I think I would like to be able to say you can be nonpartisan, but in this day and age, I'm not sure people can be, because I don't think people understand how to separate it from who they are anymore. And I think it used to be separate. I think, and I don't know where it's fallen so deeply into our core values and of how we're going to function. Because what's odd to me is, I understand religion can be a core value to you and a core belief, but that wasn't what you were using to run the government with. Like, you weren't using your core values. You were using, or you're supposed to be using, logic, the law, the Constitution, and your community and the voice of your community as a whole. As a representative, no matter what level you're on, you're supposed to be listening to the people. And whether you agree with them or not, that can really put you in a difficult place too, because my job on council isn't to sit up there and do strictly what I believe in. It's strictly what is in the best interest of the community. But what can happen is you can get easily mixed up or confused with what's in the best interest, because, like I said, there's always that 5 angry few who are the loudest and most determined and show up to every meeting. And so it can be easy to think that's who you represent, because they're there and they're talking to you and they're participating. And it's harder to take a step back and say, wait a minute, they are so statistically insignificant to the larger picture that legally or logically, they're really maybe not who you should be listening to. Because do they really represent your community as a whole, or are they representing their own self-interest and you're getting sucked into that? And that's easy to have happen. So advice that I give to council members, I don't know that I'm right on it, but this is how I look at council. And my principles do fall into play with it, though, is this going to further regulate or grow the bureaucracy? And if it is, I'm not interested in it. However, if it is a necessary for the community and the community is asking for it, or I can logically see why it's needed, then I have to set aside my principle of less regulation, more freedom, and I have to support my community. And that can be really hard to swallow sometimes. And I've had to do it, but not often. And that's why participation is so critical, because coming up to the podium and telling me what's going on in your life, or, your perspective of this issue, is really critical for me to hear. And a lot of people don't do that. And it is oftentimes how I make my decisions too. I'm not always, on council, oftentimes with legislative affairs, you can be biased. So you can already have your mind made up. There are issues that are called quasi-judicial, and those are mostly with building, with zoning, when like new apartment buildings want to come in, or a builder wants to build housing or change something. So it's quasi-judicial, and we're not supposed to be biased, because we're supposed to hear the issue for the very first time kind of as a judge and to determine whether they can do this or not. And so we're not supposed to be biased for that. But But with most of the other topics, you can have a bias and not be in trouble. And I can talk about recusing yourself for certain issues, but that's different. But I always tell counsel, okay, well, if you're pro-freedom, then you're not pro-regulation. So anything that comes in front of you, you don't need to go down the rabbit hole of trying to find every definition and find every reason and find all the logic of why then you should regulate or why you should take that freedom. I said, you can just not do it. You don't have to give up freedom. You don't have to create further regulation. That's why we're sitting here. That's the luxury of sitting here, is we are the legislative body and we set the rules. So, in a simple topic that we had come up was feeding the deer and feeding the wildlife. And everybody's freaking out because, we've got all this deer and we need to do something. And part of the option was culling the herd, which personally I thought that was the best option. But, the community freaked out because they thought people were going to be getting shot in their own homes by hunters. I mean, just really absurd, goofy things.
Trouble in River City.
Yes. And so we had to get rid of all that. We lost a council member over it because the people who were anti-culling threatened her and would threaten her dog's lives. I mean, it just got crazy. And so the best thing council came up with was, well, we would educate to not, to tell people not to feed the deer, and they would enact fines. Like the state already has fines for it, but now the city was going to enact 3 separate steps of fines, and then after the 3rd fine, you'd go to jail. And I almost fell out of my chair because can you imagine having to go to jail because you fed deer? I can't imagine that. And so my point of this is the participation of the wildlife officers helped me solidify that I was not going to put people in jail. And I actually wasn't going to risk their economic harm to them because I asked the officers, what difference does it make? Does it save the herd? Does it make the herd more healthy? Will it make people stop feeding them? And all the officers said, no. And if they're not feeding them, then the neighbor will feed them. And I said, and what happens if you've got a neighbor who's pissed at you and now they're calling the wildlife officers trying to get you fined because you've got a bird feeder out? You're not feeding the deer. So it's all these resources and all this effort. And then there's got to be investigations just to take your freedom for something that's not solving the problem. Right. And so I try to remind council members, is this solving a problem, and what is the problem before you determine further regulation? Because all regulation does is take. It takes our freedom. It never grants us any freedom. So I'm always asking them to weigh what's before us in that manner.
Well, I feel that's different between, I have the freedom to build a house, but I don't have the freedom to just dump the waste in the backyard.
Right.
And that's then the general, and I try to relate as much as I possibly can back to the Constitution, or to make it as simple as possible. Hopefully it is. But,
sure.
But I don't feel like that's the same thing as just dumping waste in your backyard, and you should be allowed to do that.
Right. I mean, there's some sensible things because the odd thing is people just can't be sensible. I always say common sense is not so common. And so it is weird that society, I hate to say it, but society does need rules. I don't hate to say it because I'm not an anarchist, but we do need rules and regulations to function as a civil society.
There has to be order.
Yes, there has to be order. Right. But how much and to what extent? And what good are you doing by that regulation? Like, who are you protecting or saving, or what harm are you causing? And I don't know that a lot of people weigh that so much when they vote. I mean, I know one council member in particular, and I've got another council member. We're hearing the short-term rental issue because I have a council member who hates that he has a short-term rental next to him. Mm-hmm. We're not hearing it because the community brought it to us. And that's the danger that people don't recognize, is that, we can sit up there with our own self-interest in mind and regulate away your freedom because we don't like something.
I think that's what it frustrated me when they brought up these people don't live here, which means they don't vote here, which means they're ruining our community. And then I looked up the stats of the votes and I thought maybe talk to your own people first.
Right.
Before that becomes a part of the data that is ruining the town.
Yes.
Because that had nothing to do with it if you looked at that, even just by voting.
Right.
So and again, this is stuff I'm learning if you just look at it.
Yeah.
But look at it at its lowest. Look at it from a town.
Yeah.
Or from someone who's been there. But that was and then the whole I don't want to live next to a pedophile, or I don't want to live next
absurd.
to a human trafficker, and I just in my experience, it was somebody who did live there forever. So do I want to ban ownership of houses now? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's just, I felt that was, it was insulting to first of all, to victims. 'Cause they're like, this is a short-term rental. Like, come on. And I felt like it was just trying to play off of emotions and somebody that was just mad, and they worked hard their whole life and no one else does, but I do. And so again, that was my second council meeting, but it was a joke. It was a show. I was surprised again by wanting to ban it just because I'm upset. And I thought this is happening everywhere.
It is.
This is not the only place that this happens.
Right.
In a place that claims to be conservative.
Uber conservative. Yeah. And what really bothers me too is with the non-owner occupied STRs. First of all, let me clarify, there are not a lot of non-owner occupied STRs in this city to begin with. There are some, but the irony is that they are owned by people who do live in this community. There are several that are owned by people who do not live here. But guess what? They're still Americans, and they can still own property in America. And you know, the other really mind-blowing thing is that even if you're not American, you can buy and own property here because that's part of the American dream and our constitutional right that was fortunately given to those that also aren't citizens. You know, they have to have visas, or they have certain boxes that they have to check off and circumstances that they have to go through in order to purchase and own property here. But guess what? They also have to pay their taxes. They can live in France or Sweden or Italy, but they can still own a home here too. And I think that that's a miracle and a blessing for anyone, you know, but we also have the same privileges of, we can go to Costa Rica, or we can go to Italy, or we can go somewhere in Europe and purchase a home. Some countries don't afford us the same rights and benefits as they afford their citizens, but this country does. And I'm not talking about illegal, you know, aliens. I'm talking about people who are doing the right thing legally. And I think that that's a great thing. Why would I want to take that from anyone? And so I really get miffed by the whole non-owner occupied argument, and as if me being a citizen of the city of Woodland Park, which just means I vote here, I'm not any different in any stature or status in this country than any other American, because we all have equal rights.
Well, and to me, that's what that was kind of like saying, if you open up any business, you have to live there. That's how I tried to simplify it, but I feel like that's what they were trying to say. And then as I talked to this council member, it was, well, just not in residential areas. And then and again, to me, it was the manipulation of it's not gonna ruin your business. We just want it in commercial areas. And again, I'm new, but even even I sat there and said, well, what family wants to go to a commercial area to rent a house and vacation in a commercial area? I mean, and I don't know that for sure, but they want to go to residential areas to make it feel or seem more homey or more comfortable or even more private than some. But and I guess it could depend on the area. But again, I'm new in it, so I just saying it that way. Again, I felt was a part of the manipulative part where some people just, no, that sounds good, so let's get rid of it, or let's go for this.
But it doesn't, because being commercial also means now instead of your 7.5% taxes or what have you, it's 29% taxation. So now not only are you forcing them out of where they were, you're forcing them into a different zone that is increased taxation, which taxation is theft, right? If you believe, but it's increased taxation, and now you're moving to a commercial zone where there aren't residential homes because it's commercial. I mean, there's no logic in the argument at all. There may be some residential homes that are in there somehow squirrely, but the majority aren't. And then what are you going to have to go to planning and ask for, a permitted use to now do something different than the zoning that's currently permitted, which is why you were trying to pull them out of residential, because they weren't permitted to begin with, according to you, to put them in a zone where now it's also still not. I mean, none of it makes any sense.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense.
Declaration of Independence, one of the grievances was that he made it hard for them. And that's really what it says. He's made it hard for us to attend trial. He's made it hard for us to attend meetings or even just meet. And I'm oversimplifying it, but I thought you're making it harder for somebody to own a business.
Yes.
And that was, I've gone to war for less, on some things, on some level. Right. But that's where I took it right away. And it goes back to if you're not involved, there's so much that could be. How much does what happens here in the city of Woodland Park, how much of that affects the state or the even just the nation in itself? Does regulations and things that happen here affect the federal level?
No, not necessarily, but it does affect the county level, because the county commissioners are watching the decisions we make, because they haven't made a decision on STRs yet. So they're watching our process and seeing what we're determining and how we're going about it. So it goes from affecting a city of 8,000 to a county of nearly 40,000. So it can have a large impact.
Sure. But I think that again, I'm learning so much just talking about this, because people are worried at this high level, but if you took care of what you had to here, and the dream is like, hopefully everyone, takes care of their own stuff. But
it can impact in the sense of lawsuits, because the Colorado State Supreme Court is hearing issues now on short-term rentals. So what happens here, I don't know that it necessarily would, touch anything nationally per se, but it does touch the state. It can, if we make a bad decision. If we take people's property, I bet they're ready to get an attorney to do something about that, especially if it's arbitrary and capricious. I mean, our council, I keep arguing that, tell me why we need to do this. Tell me why we need to take property. And my council can't tell me why. They keep going back to, well, they're noisy, or there's cars. And I keep saying it's zoning. It's not zoning, it's code ordinance. It's code ordinance that already has regulations put in place. That's not a short-term rental. And then they say, well, the quality of the neighborhoods. And I keep saying, okay, well, what's it doing to the quality of the neighborhoods? Well,
Very
no,
simple question.
yeah, no one can, well, they have loud parties. Well, that's code ordinance. It's a code violation. How is someone losing their home or losing their ability to use their home for a profit? Because we're not just talking about people who don't live in them. We're talking about people who live in them and rent them, rent their basements out or rent room. They're already residents. They already live in the neighborhood. They're already established. I mean, the house isn't changing. The house isn't getting demolished or torn apart or huge additions put on. So it's not changing the visual character of the community. Right. And I understand that, there's maybe more transient comings and goings of some houses, but it's not entire blocks.
But do you think that even with those reasons, it's still a reason?
No, it's not enough. I don't think it's enough at all. So, and it frustrates me because they want to say, well, they're running a business out of their house. People
and
sell.
I say, so what?
I know, but people sell on Etsy. They drop ship for Amazon. My neighbor runs a sign business he built an entire structure to have a sign shop. It looks like a garage, but it's for signs. And he did it while we lived here. We didn't fight him. We're like, so what do we care? I didn't care. Why am I going to try to stop his entrepreneurial livelihood? Why do I want to stop that? Right. I don't. And if I did, I would have moved into an HOA. Right. And that's what everybody else they keep missing, that if you want to regulate really closely the neighborhood you live in, then move into one that has an HOA. Because who better than the neighbors to regulate your neighborhood? Because I don't live in your neighborhood, and I have a job, and I work, and I take care of my mom who has dementia, and I'm married to a pilot who's not home all the time, and I'm so busy, I don't care who's coming and going from the house next to me. I especially don't know what's happening in your neighborhood, but you do. But you want me to determine everyone's fate of that neighborhood. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. I guess because, people get mad if I say it, but maybe because you're lazy, you just think it's easier if I handle it with a group of 6 other people who don't live in your neighborhood, don't have the time, maybe really don't care.
I mean, there are a lot of laws on a lot of things that's never stopped anybody. So I didn't understand garbage or being loud or parties or whatever your issue was in your neighborhood. And I learned about a lot about HOAs too. And I encourage people to watch some scummy HOA scandals that have happened anyway. And I go back to that council member that said, if you have an issue, talk about it.
Yeah.
Bring it up.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's, again, it's just nope, I'm not going to do that. You handle it. You take care of it. Right. So if there was something you could say to, and just your citizens, just the people that are in, how much of your job would be a lot easier if more people participated? And it's not about making it easy, but I'm just saying how much could be handled the more participation you had, even just in a council meeting. And like you said, if I hear your stories, we can all dictate what to do at that point. I want a traffic light, or I want a stop sign, or I want to ban STRs, but how much of that would be easier, so to speak, if the more participation you had?
I don't know that the word easier is the right word. I don't think it would make it easier, but I think it would enlighten people to how the process works. And they could feel better about the decisions being made because they know they had a voice in it, rather than just being angry about whatever decision was determined. I think it helps. I mean, it's kind of like being in a marriage, right? Or something. Like, if you talk about the issue rather than stewing on it and not communicating, it just blows the problem up. So if you want to feel like there's a resolution that you can you may not always agree with it, but at least you know you were a part of the process. I mean, we hold workshops and sessions to have our citizens participate, not just in council meetings, but in our comprehensive plan and in strategic planning. And we put the word out there, and it's on Facebook and the websites and flyers and in newspapers, and like 40 people show up. And then people are pissed that something
happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and it's hard because people as a whole have to remember, something strange happens to my council members when they get up on the dais. I know all of them personally. I don't know all of them really well, but I know them all personally. I know their families. I know a lot about them, and I know their characters. And when they get up on the dais, though, I suddenly can feel like they're nervous or they're apprehensive. Like the larger the audience that comes in or the angrier the person is at the podium, suddenly I can feel them like wanting to back down or give to that person. And so people have to remember that angry five can dictate a whole lot for this town, depending on the personalities that are sitting up at the dais. And there are people that work behind the scenes too. There aren't just the angry five that show up. I mean, there are whole groups of individuals, not just in this town, but communities all over the place that are behind the scenes trying to manipulate council members, trying to convince council members to do something. I think one of my council members currently, one of the reasons he has this random idea is because he's got a group of people that are telling him what they think the best thing is, and he should be doing that, and that's why he's trying to make the decision he's making. It's not an independent thought. He didn't come up with it on his own, and I know the group of people behind it, and they're always there. There are always people like that. And so you as a citizen need to recognize that your council member may not be an independent thinker either. And things are getting determined for you and your community that are done by just a small group of people. And sometimes they're the angry people, sometimes they're the ignorant people, sometimes they're the, regulating, loving commies. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, and I mean, no matter where you're at, on whether you're left or right, liberal or conservative, do it locally. If you want something, do it locally. And even if it came down to just banning STRs completely, get more people to at least vote, and see what type of participation that is. And then from there, if you want to watch something burn, like, go ahead. Right. I don't see where taking away that freedom would help anything. And I think it would take some time to find out really quickly. Well, it might not take that much time to find out that it was a bad idea. But yeah, locally, if you want something, stop going up here to get it. Do it locally. And like, if it's with 5 people who just show up to the meetings, even then, that's not enough. And if anything, I saw more people speaking against it than I did, speaking for STRs against banning them, than I did for people who were, but again, like, gripe about it, but don't show up. At this, on either side, whether you're on either side, gripe about it, but don't show up. And it's, at least from what I'm learning and what I've learned, it's very effective to just show up sometimes, learn a little bit, learn a lot.
Right.
If you've never been before.
Right. And depending on the issues that council members are hearing, if you're an expert in the subject matter that they're hearing, or you're not, you're just a regular person, when you come up to the podium and talk to us and tell us your experience or your knowledge, you may be opening the eyes of one or many who didn't have that perspective, or they didn't have that knowledge, because we can't be subject matter experts in everything we hear, and we rely a lot on our staff, and we have to have trust in our staff that they're doing their job and giving us the information we need. And we also rely on the public for that feedback. So, and before I space it out, if people are interested in participating in council or maybe ever running for council, but they're nervous because they feel like they don't have the experience necessary, every community also has a planning commission. We have the Board of Adjustments, Parks and Rec. There are all kinds of city boards that you can volunteer for. You don't have to run to be elected to the positions. You get appointed by council, but you just sign up and hopefully get appointed, because usually there aren't enough volunteers for the positions to begin with. And Board of Adjustments and the Planning Commission are two very educational and can be very difficult positions, though, to sit in, just like council, because you're determining a lot of setbacks for building, zoning changes, all kinds of things that really impact land and property and freedom, and big decisions that cities make. Because council also relies on the Planning Commission they have their own hearings, they make their own determinations, and then they send those over to council. And that's what's happened with the short-term rentals. Planning Commission, we held workshops together. Then they held their own meetings. They had the public participate, and they came up with an ordinance. And then they send that ordinance over to us. We screw it up. And then...
How do you screw it up?
Well, they listen to the community the same as we do. They get the feedback same as we do. They're 7 individuals, same as us. A lot of them they're well-established community members. They have lots of experience, lots of knowledge. So they worked very hard to come up with the ordinance that they handed to us originally. They tried to be fair and balanced as much as you can be when you're creating regulations. And then I don't even think several of our council members looked at the ordinance. They just had in their mind what they wanted to do, and they totally brushed it aside. But what they forget is, if you're going to substantially change that ordinance, guess what? It has to go back to the Planning Commission. And then they can have hearings again, they can make decisions again, or they can just say, oh, we're not dealing with this. And then they can come up with their own ordinance again. So there can be a huge, backlog of bureaucratic BS, all while property owners are stuck under a moratorium and not able to move forward with what they'd been doing. And it can really become a nightmare because people have in their own minds what they think they're going to do and what they think is right.
It's kind of like, I know what's best for you.
Right. Even
though you met and talked about it, heard people's voices, but I know what's best.
Yeah. And then
that's unreal.
And then, then we have the initial posting of that ordinance. That the first one fell apart, so it got tabled. And then I came back, we had the initial posting, and you heard the public come up and say, why aren't you using the Planning Commission's ordinance? What's wrong with it? What are you guys doing? Why are you trying to either scrap it altogether, or you're changing it so much that it's, not true to the form anymore? Like, what are you guys doing? Because the public had the time to see the ordinance and digest it. And though some weren't happy with it, and I don't think it was perfect by any means, I didn't love it, but I was willing to accept it over banning people's rights completely. And the Planning Commission never once talked about non-owner occupied. They treated everyone the same. So there was no segregation of, owner versus non-owner, which I think also could potentially legally be a problem for the city, because we can't justify why, if you don't live here, you shouldn't be allowed to do it, right, versus living here, you can do it, kind of thing. But that's where the public input mattered too, because then it started to sway council to realize maybe we were acting too brash, or, we now we hear that people are comfortable with this and they're not scared of this ordinance, and maybe it is okay. And even though we still are back and forth on that ordinance, tonight will be where we make hopefully make a decision that is sound and logical, and carry forward. But that's why, the public gets to participate in the planning commission, and that helps them make their decision, and then coming to council and just even coming up and saying, oh God, I hate that ordinance. Here's why. Maybe you mentioned something I didn't think of. Or okay, yeah, we can live with this ordinance. We understand why you're doing it, and we can accept it. And, we're not going to sue the city to the ground.
Right.
So participation does matter. And we do hear you, although sometimes you may feel like you're not being heard, but.
Sure. No, and I think it's, all of it is good, because I'm not the only one who didn't have any clue what actually happens at some of that. And I truly do believe and feel that it's an individual's job to find out, right?
Right.
So I don't blame people in positions of power for not finding the individual and telling them. And it's hard to. I had a guest out a couple weeks ago that he made the comment, and it wasn't in any negative way, but he just said, "You're assuming that people care."
Right.
And to a fault, yeah. I'm hoping that from hearing what you've presented, and even just at a town level, because everyone thinks of a federal level.
Yes.
And hopefully that's encouraging, because it is intimidating to head to your first council meeting. And but that's what got you to even just run. And there's a lot of smart people out there, and and I feel that there are people that care, but they may not know what to do. And if anything, I think watching people have conversations I think it's helped a lot of people, just eyes opened or learning. Sure. Or whatever. So I appreciate the information that you've given. I think I'd probably be a reoccurring guest, especially after some of these meetings. But
yeah, well, I'd be happy to. And the other thing too is, even if you don't want to run for council, but you're still interested in the ongoing procedures and what happens, and the next time you see an election in your community, go to the meet and greets and figure out who these candidates are, and get to know them and talk to them and meet with them one-on-one, and they should be willing to do that with you. And with your current elected officials, my phone number is public. My email is public. My address is public. So, because once you're an elected official, you got to hang it all out there. Anybody can call me. Anybody can call me. Anybody can email me. Anybody can ask me to meet them for coffee. And I don't think I've ever turned anyone down. So, that's my job. I represent you. And, the one interesting thing about Woodland Park too is we're all volunteers. We don't get paid for this position in any way, shape, or form. So
most mind-blowing for me when I realized, oh my gosh, these people still have jobs that they still have to do. And really though, I don't know how many people know that.
Not most.
Because at the Cascade meeting, someone said, we elected you. And this guy on the council said, no, we're all volunteers. Talking about being paid, right. And our elected officials, and he had to point that out at the council meeting. Yeah. We don't get paid for this. And it wasn't a shot as if sit down and be quiet. It was just more of I think what blew my mind though, they didn't know, and I didn't know.
Right. Yeah. So, and some councils get stipends that are pretty small. We're not one of them. We don't even get a stipend. So, but then some councils, like Denver, they make they're paid like it's a full-time job. It's like 80 or 90,000 a year or something like that. But
I think that is eye-opening in itself, because when you see bigger cities and smaller cities, smaller towns, and I don't care if somebody gets paid. It doesn't bug me if somebody gets paid for work that they do. Yeah. But I think it's a lot, to me, it's easier for me to say, well, this one over here has an incentive that this one doesn't. Yeah. And to me, the sincerity is different.
I like that we don't get paid, because it really means that you do want to serve your community. And I think it keeps you closer to the purpose of service. I don't think I would like to see that, all politicians weren't paid, and then who would really run to serve.
I mean, that used to be the case.
Yeah. So, and I think that would be great, and then you wouldn't have anybody running anymore.
Right.
But because it is a lot of work, and you do have to balance, your work, your life, counsel, all of that. So, right. But we are available for anybody to call us and talk to us. And even if you're not in my community and you are intimidated by the elected officials you have in your community, you can call me as a mayor and say, hey, mayor, I have this mayor who I'm not comfortable talking to, and I have these questions and I don't know who else. You can ask me. Maybe I can call that mayor for you, Right. You never know. So I have high school kids that are interested in politics, and they have my name and number, so that when they want to learn stuff, they can call me, and maybe I can put them in touch with state representatives or Congress members or county officials, and it helps as a connection too, and introducing them to the process and to people. Sure. So, and that's my job as your representative. Is to make sure you're connected to things, and to do it openly, and to help you, not hurt you, not take your freedom from you.
Right. No, and I the youth, the young, this is what that's for. I'm so hoping that more young, because if you look now, they've been around for a long time. Some of, or if you look at a federal level,
sure,
been around for a long time.
Yeah. And
so it's neat to see more, and I'm speaking for myself too, maybe need to get more involved with things, or just be aware of stuff. But no, that's neat transparency to have, for people to just reach out to you. Yeah. I don't think many know that, and some probably are not approachable, but
probably not. Yeah, I can imagine that. So, but I know my entire council is, whether I agree with them or their decisions or not, I know we're all approachable. So, and I know we can all be reached, and I hope and assume that they would all participate with the public. So,
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We'll be talking to you again.
I'd love it. So, thanks a lot.
For the Viral Expedition, I'm Nathan Lewis, Studio Veritatis.